Shabbat Shalom. Ilana, you don't mind if I pick on you just a little bit, do you? Because you're the youngest person in the room, which makes you an easy target. How old are you? 16. 16! 16! I remember when you were just that high and you used to come running up on the beam. Am I annoying you? Yeah, if I keep going, right? I'm sure if your parents start bringing out the baby pictures and start talking about when she learned to walk and remember when she did this silly thing and that silly. If you really want to annoy a teenager, remind them of who they were when they were 5 years old. If you really want to embarrass them, show all their friends who they were when they were 5 years old. What's that? She always was perfect. Wow, that is a man who has learned how to live with the teenager. The thing is, that it should be something that we are proud of, that we are different, that we have changed. The fact that when you look in the mirror and you don't see a 5-year-old staring back at you, whether it is your 16th birthday or a few more birthdays on top of that, that should be a remarkable, a miraculous event. That you are no longer that same person that you were. Or do you think you still are? Do you still think you're a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15, maybe? For those of us that have a few more years, are you still the same person you were 10 years ago? No. The High Holidays is all about that power of transformation, that power of change, that power of the soul to be different than it was. Indeed, for that to be the primary vehicle of our mission in Judaism, for our soul to develop and grow through the experiences and transformations, hopefully more positive than negative, throughout our time in this life. But for that to be true, we need to consider the alternative. What does it mean to not change? What does it mean to be static? If I were to tell you there is a, see, this is the problem, I'm still a California boy at heart. I was going to say, there is a mountain, but you're all from Florida. You don't know what mountains are. You've never seen a mountain. There's a very, very big tree. How about we'll work on that? There's a very, very big tree. Some of the trees in Florida, I understand, are hundreds of years old. Is that, what about the earth beneath our feet? Static? No, not at all. Right? Especially in Florida with all of the sandy, loose soil. It's always changing underneath. There is always water erosion. There is always things that are happening. That means even the earth beneath our feet is not the same. And as eternal as we may speak about from the crashing waves of the ocean, the very fact that there are crashing waves in the ocean of Leah, 7 gods, right? No? Yes? No. There's only one, right? Adonai Echad. God is only one. But we describe God as being a God for each of them. And indeed, Eloheinu as well, for being a God of us. We talk about Elohei Moshe, Elohei David, talk about the God that was the God for all of these different people throughout history. But we say God is only one. How does that work? How can God be a God for each of them and yet be the same God? I mean, after all, like I just said for Ilana, sorry to come back to you again, right? The 5-year-old version versus the 16-year-old version are not the same. So how can it be that the God that was with Abraham 2,000 years ago is the same now? Doesn't that mean God has just been like lazy and not growing, not developing? God is not changing who God is? I mean, if that were a human being and we had 2,000 years to grow, we'd probably all think that that person had not put enough time into self-help. Natan, I saw your hand begin to flutter. The relationship between him and us changed. I'm just going to flip that a little bit. The relationship of us to him changed. Well, it's both directions, except only one of us is changing. Again, to go back to a metaphor, right? To go back to a metaphor, when there is a huge, giant, beautiful tree, if I move, I can see the tree from a different perspective. And if I move back this way, I can see from the tree from a different perspective. The tree didn't move. In my field of vision, the tree is moving. In my perception of the tree, and hopefully my understanding of the tree, that is shifting depending upon how I move myself. And certainly from my point of view, because, I am an egocentric human being, it looks like the tree is accommodating me. But in fact, the tree is unmoved by me. The tree is permanent and static, again, to extend the metaphor towards God, and unchanging. It is merely my relationship. And if I'm standing here, and Abraham is over there, and David is over there, and we are all looking at that tree, we are looking at the same tree. Even if David's relationship was such that he could compose the beautiful song that was chanted in the Haftarah, even if Abraham's relationship was so different that he could see that it was time to leave Haran and come to the land of Canaan, they were looking at the same God. And by same, I mean literally the same. This is the part where the smoke starts coming out the ears. Because when I say I'm looking at the same tree with a bunch of other people, that makes perfect sense. We're sort of okay with that. The metaphor seems comfortable. But when I say, no. This person is 2,000, this person is 3,000, this person is 500, whatever years ago, and they are all looking at the same God. I don't mean they are looking at God that existed then, and then traveled through time in the normal way that we live and grow, like mountains, trees, and other things, and then someone else took a glance, and then going through time, and then someone else took a glance. I mean, each person is looking at God simultaneously. Right now, as we are talking about God, so is Abraham talking to his family about the same God. Moses, right now, is communicating with God, and so are you, the same God simultaneously. But God is not having a conversation with Moses in the past and having a conversation with us in the present. God has no past, present, and future. God is. And that means that all of our connections to God, from the first to the last, are happening in the eternal moment of now. Moses didn't talk to God first, before us, from God's point of view. Moses is talking to God at the same time we are talking to God, from God's point of view. And yes, I apologize for the anthropomorphism of points of view, but we have to use some language to make this work. So let's go back to that image of the mirror. That means that when we are talking to God, we are looking towards this mirror to see some understanding, to see some reflection, and depending upon where we stand, either by our own choice or by the choice of our circumstances and time, we are going to see a different reflection. We may see a reflection of ourselves, which reminds us of the potential of our hope for being better. We may see a reflection of ourselves that highlights some of our mistakes, our flaws. When we see the reflection of ourselves that highlights our mistakes and our flaws, we are saying God is angry. When we see a reflection of ourselves that highlights the hope, the potential, we say God is compassionate. God didn't change. The mirror didn't move. The way you chose to look into it moved. When we see that God is angry, because we are looking at God and feeling through that relationship all of the suffering that our behavior has caused us and others, and we know that that is not what God wants, and thus we say God is angry, to use a human phrase that allows God to be more accessible to more. And then we change our behavior, and we realize that God also wants us to be better and can be better, and indeed is willing to always give help and assistance in that. Then we say God has forgiven us. God didn't change. God is eternal and unmoving. But God has continually allowed us to understand what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is and what can be. And it is we that are meant to change. That is our purpose in this world. It is God's purpose not to change those rules and cheat us when we are trying to do what God has commanded, so that we can rely upon the instructions that we have been given. Now this probably sounds really complicated, and it is. In fact, this is one of the reasons, according to Ibn Ezra, one of the great medieval commentators, that the Torah doesn't talk about all of this explicitly. Ibn Ezra, like many of the commentators, was a little bit of an elitist when it came to understanding. And he said, look, one person in 1,000 doesn't understand God, the world to come, the soul, or any of that. And the Torah didn't bother writing it explicitly because only 1 in 1,000 person would have understood it anyway. So the Torah only wrote in a way that could be accessible to the entirety of the nation. But if you read carefully, if you listen to his commentary, the commentary of others, then you can begin to get those insights. Because think, for example, of what the implication is. The implication is that God is truly unmoving, unchanging, and always the same. That the God that we connect to is identical at this very moment with the God that has been related to by all of our ancestors and all of our descendants. Those who are yet to come from our point of view have already been born, lived, and connected to God. Then that means that as we understand ourselves, we are part of something much more than just our own little slice. When we look into that mirror, we may tend to focus on ourselves. Am I doing wrong? Am I doing right? How am I seeing this understanding from God and what God has tried to teach me? But if you peer a little bit more deeply into that mirror, you'll recognize that you are not only seeing what God wants you to see and help you see, but that you are seeing the past, the present, and the future. That you are seeing all of those who have come before and all of those who will come. And that we are connected to them through this unity of God, the same way that we are connected to God itself. And that this is something that is hard, impossible for a human mind to comprehend and hold on to within this world. But ultimately, that is the promise of Olam Haba, of the world to come. Ultimately, our minds will be allowed to be opened when we are no longer constrained by all of the limitations of living in this physical world, to the idea that not only is God one, but so are we. We are Echad. Because we have that connection to the unmoving. We have that connection to that point, that fulcrum of all of reality. And as such, we have a connection to all that have been and all who will be. It's not something that we can tap into. This is not a special self-help section of access the power of your descendants now. Right? 10 easy steps to draw Abraham into your life and get him to do your taxes. No. This is about feeling that connection, that depth of reality and of existence that goes beyond the mundane and transitory actions of our day. Not because we don't need to do them. We do. Still got to do your own taxes, folks. But because we need to recognize that there is more to that. That we are more than merely what we do on a day-to-day basis. That we are more than who we may think of ourselves being as just a physical creature. That we are one of these refractions of the mirror of God. And that we are all in this together. All of us who have been, are, and will be. And God is with all of us the same as God is with Abraham, as with Moses, is with David, is with us. Shabbat Shalom. If you're still confused, good. There's a reason why books have been written about this over thousands of years and why books continue to be written, because it is not an easy concept, and the language and metaphors that I used may or may not have been able to explain it clearly enough for you today. That's okay. I know the limitations of my own abilities, and I know that my words are not always perfect for each person at each moment. But continue to study, to learn, to try and experience this miracle of understanding that I am trying to hint towards. And you will find, little by little, it comes into focus.